despite our differences of opinions at times, this government has returned the support we gave them post-election, both on a local and provincial level. You know, our role here as 3 MLAs is much like walking a tightrope. We must hold government's feet to the fire while also pushing them towards bold moves and different thinking. I'm proud that through our cooperative relationship with government that we have seen some signs of change. For the first time in over a decade, we have been part of a budgetary surplus that only a few years ago seemed impossible. As a father of 3, Silas, Chrysalie, and Felicity, I fully understand that every penny we as government borrow today will cause them great sacrifice in the future. Just look at the decades of reckless spending that is now resulting in a massive debt, putting frontline services in jeopardy. If you don't understand this concept, just look at government's inability to provide basic services. Just yesterday, news broke about the Campbellton Hospital reverting to what they called extreme emergency measures and closing 3 main services within their facility. Or you can look to the District Education Council that first refused to pass their own budget due to lack of human resources within the classrooms. Talk to the head of any government department, and it becomes very clear that money is always an issue in delivering good government service. All of these things, Madam Speaker, go beyond policy or management. The real culprit is decades of government after government spending more than they brought in. Borrowing and spending, spending and borrowing. Unfortunately, the MasterCard has been maxed out and the creditors have come knocking. Madam Speaker, if we as private citizens managed our household finances the way previous governments have managed tax dollars, we'd all be broke and homeless. Regardless, it's now up to all of us to get the fiscal house in order while maintaining reasonable services to the taxpayers of this province. It will require some outside-the-box thinking and eliminating redundant services, including dual services simply based on language. It will also mean ending wasteful government spending and redirecting those finances to frontline services. Although fiscal prudence is critical, we must not allow government to cut so deep that it has a reverse effect on service delivery for the taxpayers of New Brunswick. I was pleased to have contributed to the changes to WorkSafe legislation to stem the bleeding within the private and public sector. Without these changes, businesses would have folded up and our economic situation would have gotten much worse. We introduced our first bill on changes to the Motor Vehicle Act, and I want to commend the Minister of Public Safety for assisting us in passing that bill and making it easier for the people of New Brunswick to operate a vehicle and also getting us in line with the rest of the country. I look forward to the completion of that bill around January 1st as we end annual motor vehicle inspections. We have, as a caucus, and we will continue to fight hard for our paramedics. They are the people you want to see the most in your worst of time. Paramedics in New Brunswick are often overworked and underappreciated, and I am proud that our push for changes last fall has allowed unilingual paramedics permanent full-time work. My appreciation goes out to the Premier and the Minister of Health for working with us to accomplish that. I'm cautiously optimistic that reclassification will be next for our paramedics because they deserve recognition beyond their current status. Madam Speaker, I believe the citizens of New Brunswick, they expect stability in this House. I'm hard-pressed to find anybody, inside or outside the political sphere, that wants an election. On the contrary, the vast majority of New Brunswickers want all of us to do our jobs and provide the stability in government that they want and need. As such, our team committed to 18 months of stable government, and I'm optimistic that we can see that through. Excuse me. Once again, here we are, finding ourselves in the middle of another throne speech. This throne speech has elements of our platform that I am pleased to be part of. Abolishing billing numbers for physicians and increasing the role of nurse practitioners are two key elements of our health policies. I want to go further by urging the Minister of Health to open up the scope of practice for optometrists, chiropractors, and pharmacists. The only way we can help alleviate and create a stronger public health care system is to incorporate elements of the private health care system when and where possible. I want to encourage the Minister of Education to not be timid when it comes to rolling out a strong education plan. Things like immersion that we know streamlines our kids into 2 different classes has been an absolute failure and does nothing to produce truly bilingual graduates. We must seek out alternatives to how our kids are taught the second language. Forest harvesting, private woodlot owners, and herbicide spraying are becoming more and more problematic. We cannot, as a legislature, ignore the elephant in the room any longer. I was pleased that the Minister of Natural Resources and Energy Development is moving to increase conservation areas, but we must go further. Changes to herbicide spraying with the goal of elimination is needed, while also demanding that wood allocation is increased for private woodlot owners. If we truly want a strong private sector, we have to adopt policies that lead us to that goal. When barriers are in place that hinders that growth, we must work to remove them. Over-taxation and regulation are 2 common barriers that need to be addressed. We cannot reasonably tax the life out of business and expect the private sector to invest in New Brunswick. We cannot continue to double tax those properties and think that somehow jobs will just show up. While making changes to the Days of Rest Act that allows real estate agents to close their properties is only common sense, that in and of itself is in no way going to revolutionize economic growth. I was disappointed that again we saw another handout of our tax dollars in corporate welfare. While I'm pleased that HCL Technologies is coming to New Brunswick, I'm concerned that giving them $6.26 million of our tax dollars to get them here is simply inappropriate, especially when the other businesses in the area and around the province are paying high taxes that ultimately fund that handout to large corporations. Lower taxes, repayable loans that protect the taxpayer is a better way to grow the economy in which all businesses can benefit, not just a few. As my colleague from Fredericton South mentioned, I too was hoping to see local programs to fight climate change. Where my riding of Fredericton Grand Lake has seen the devastating effects of climate change more than any other, I know and understand the importance of this issue. Now, I'm not talking about pie-in-the-sky ideas that have been proposed by some members of this House, but rather practical and doable initiatives like energy refitting for residential homes, subsidizing households who choose to tighten up their homes from energy loss, or residents who want cleaner energy like solar or geothermal should have more government support. Think about this. The $200+ million we spend every year on corporate welfare, if we were to redirect that to projects such as refitting homes and environmental initiatives for residential customers, would lower the stress on the electricity grid, it would create jobs and help the environment. I'm cautiously optimistic that we may finally see changes to taxation and how municipalities collect those taxes. We are the only province in the country that has such an outdated and archaic tax system. I'm pleased that through our efforts and our many meetings with the Minister of Finance, the Premier himself, and Cabinet, that discussions with government, that movement may indeed be on the horizon. I'm equally pleased that our call for the privatization of Cannabis NB is finally in the works. While I believe that a private, open market is best, and I want to reiterate a quote from a wise man earlier who said that monopolies don't serve the best interests of citizens. I agree wholeheartedly. I would advocate that the government take the words from the Minister of Health said here today and apply that to cannabis NB where it only makes sense. I believe in an open market free system. Government has big things to worry about. Retailing anything, let alone marijuana, shouldn't be one of them. I believe that a private open market system is best, and I disagree with the private monopoly model. However, any model that privatizes cannabis NB is leaps and bounds better than what the previous government had set in motion with the expensive and ridiculous government retail model. It is unthinkable, Madam Speaker, that taxpayers have essentially subsidized the sale of marijuana through retail losses. Think about that for a minute. We're not talking about subsidizing help for homeless, or we talk a lot about poverty. We're not talking about subsidizing education. We're talking about literally subsidizing the sale of marijuana. It's equally unthinkable that the opposition parties here today continue to hold their position that government selling marijuana is a good thing, despite the overwhelming evidence that this model is a complete failure in every single sense. It was the leader of the Liberal Party who just yesterday stated on a CBC panel that cannabis NB in New Brunswick has been a home run. No, he actually said that. The Liberal Party leader said cannabis NB in New Brunswick has been a home run. Now, if that's the position of the Liberal Party of New Brunswick, it just goes to show how oblivious they are to the reality on the ground. I believe we should not stop with cannabis NB privatization, but we should also turn NB liquor over to the private sector. Government was never intended to be in retail. Government's role should always be to regulate and tax these products and let the private sector do what the private sector does best. Madam Speaker, I am disheartened and worried about the current stalemate with our public unions and government. The last thing New Brunswick needs now is government and unions fighting. I sympathize with many of our public sector employees that are overworked and some of whom are underpaid. But I also understand that in order for New Brunswick to get its financial house in order, it has to be fiscally prudent. As such, I want to reiterate my call for union leadership and government to bargain in good faith with realistic demands and understanding that can find balance and avoid labor disruptions. Madam Speaker, this past year has proved how a minority government can work in the best interests of citizens. For over 100 years, either the red or the blue parties have controlled this House without any tangible ability to stop the governing power from carrying through with its desires. The only reckoning before this time for a bad majority government was simply every 4 years at an election. Madam Speaker, 4 years is a long time that can do a lot of damage that can last generations. However, in this situation of what is a historic minority government, there is the additional checks and balances that majority governments have never in the past had to adhere to. Even committees have dramatically changed in how they deal with and report on files. For the first time in over 100 years, it's the opposition parties that control committees, something that has been completely unheard of in the past. In closing, Madam Speaker, I want to continue to demonstrate to the people of New Brunswick that they made the right decision in allowing us into this legislature and that electing a minority government was the right thing to do. Myself, my colleagues will continue to work tirelessly to do what is right, even above what sometimes may be popular. and to extend that cooperative attitude to anyone on either side of this House. Thank you, Madam Speaker.